In poker, when we get to the river in a hand and face a bet from our opponent, that is a big, expensive decision. It is the street where the pot is the biggest and the ranges are the most defined. All of the community cards are visible and all the actions have been taken. Now we have to complete the puzzle in order to make the best decision. I'm Alexandre Mantovani, otherwise known as Cavalito, and I'm a professional poker player and 888 Poker Ambassador. In this short video, I'll walk you through my personal decision-making process to when to call a river bet. Ask yourself these questions in this specific order in order to make better river decisions. Does my opponent value bet a worse hand? This should always be our first question when facing a bet on the river. Would our opponent only bet with the nuts, or he does this with other hands as well for value? Basically, if our opponent could be value betting worse hands than ours in this situation, we have a crystal clear call and it's going to be a profitable one in the long term, even if you're not right this time. Keep in mind that our opponents don't usually play or think like we do, so you can't just think about how you would do in that situation. That is a big mistake. Think about how they have been playing and use your personal reads to make better decisions in that situation. Is this river spot an easy one for my opponents to overbluff? Getting into your opponent's head to judge how often they're going to bluff is not an easy task. However, there are some situations that are very easy for both professional and recreational players to bluff a bit more than they should. Take the situation where our opponent has to bet the flop and the turn, and the river is an ace and they bet again. The ace is a good example of a scary card, but ask yourself if they would have bet the flop and turn with a hand that hits the ace on the river. Would they have played it like this and opened themselves up to being raised off and having to fold the flop on the turn? If you think your opponent is going to get more aggressive on specific runouts, be willing to call more often. Do I block my opponent's value range? Blockers are cards that make it statistically less likely your opponent has a specific hand. Blockers are very relevant in poker, and even more so for river decisions because that's where we have the most information and where the ranges are the most defined. If your hand has cards that interact with the hands your opponent would bet for value, you should be more inclined to call. If you're holding certain cards in your hand, that means it's less likely they have the top of their range. If your hand has cards that interact with the hands your opponent would bluff with, you should be more inclined to fold because it's less likely they have those hands and so less likely they're bluffing. Do I have a specific read on this opponent? Of course, it is important to understand concepts and theories behind the game of poker, but it's still a game of logic and people. Sometimes you're facing an opponent you have a lot of information on. Maybe you know that this specific person likes to bluff when the flush gets there, for example. You've seen them do it, maybe you even have a note on it. Even if there's some evidence they might not be bluffing here, it's okay to just go with your read sometimes. Poker is a complex game, and most of the time we don't have enough information. It's very hard to know what our opponents do on rivers because they don't happen that often. We should carefully evaluate all the information that we have and then make our decision based on that, and sometimes we have to use our reads. Are there any other aspects at play? Be aware of other dynamics that are in play when facing a river bet. Facing a river bet in a deep stack cash game is not the same as facing a river bet in different poker situations. If you're playing a bounty tournament with a huge stack and your opponent who has a big bounty is moving all in, you can be a bit more flexible on how light you call. On the other hand, imagine you're playing a final table and have a good stack, but the chip leader puts you all in, while there are still a couple of other short stacks at the table. In this situation, you should be very conservative about calling down. It's not always just about the cards and your reads. You should be aware of all the dynamics at play. Check out more great content in our channels and leave a comment below. 888 Poker. Made to learn, made to play.